Now, I'm delighted to say that yet another voice of common sense joins us now. Peter Hitchens for, I think, is it number 12 or 13? Peter, very good morning to you.
Counting.
I've sort of run out of numbers. I'm not entirely sure, but certainly people have been remarking on how cordial our conversations now are and how much I agree with you.
Do you think we should put an end to this?
Well, I think we might have to just throw a few sort of rocks at each other for a while just to keep things interesting. But I was fascinated by your piece of the weekend, not least because of the very due diligence that you'd given, which is very rare in journalism these days. You actually put some work in and got some facts from the Department of Health to discover precisely what was going on in Leicester. Tell us about the testing situation.
Well, I asked a number of questions. The answers I got, I have to say, were in many cases quite confusing. They did eventually answer. And eventually, the Department of Health simply said, go and talk to Public Health England. It's almost always the case if you start asking any official or state office what it is that they're doing, they refer you to somebody else. It's the first response to any question. But I thought I would ask, given the rise in the number of recorded infections in Leicester, whether there had been a substantial increase in the amount of testing. And I asked when were the testing stations opened, and they came back with this answer, and it showed that of the 8 testing stations which were then open at the time I asked my question, 7 had been open since, I think, June the 18th.
Yeah.
Which is precisely the period when the number of infections is supposed to have gone up so alarmingly. Now, it's been rightly pointed out that the truth is, of course, the number of infections is not in any way influenced by the amount of testing that we do, but what you can do is influence the number of infections which is recorded. And it did strike me that an 8-fold increase in the number of testing stations was pretty likely to produce a larger number of detected infections. And the question that nobody asks in any of these matters is this: what does it mean when you say infection? Does it mean the person is flat on his back in intensive care, desperately close to death, or does it mean that a test, which, by the way, is notorious for its inaccuracy, has found that person might be suffering from COVID-19, but he or she has no symptoms? And the latter is much more likely than the former. So what are we fussing about? Infection sounds horrible, doesn't it? It sounds as if you've picked up something really nasty and you're going to have to take to your bed and be surrounded by people sheeted in plastic and masks. But actually it doesn't mean that at all. And it's all part of what I call the continuation of fear by other means.
Yes.
Having frightened the country stiff at the beginning, the government now feels a danger that its power will drain away if it doesn't keep the fear up. So here come these infections and this constant second wave, the second coming of the COVID religion.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean,
it never comes.
No, I mean, I asked the question last week of a doctor, and I said, how is it that they've come to this conclusion that the spike in Leicester is happening? And he said to me, entirely erroneously as it turns out, that this was the number of people admitted to hospital with COVID. So I said, well, that's fair enough then. It means that more people are being admitted to hospital. It turns out that wasn't true at all. And it is just as a result, as you say, of the tests.
There is a slight increase in the number of people admitted. But what, again, does that mean? Does that mean they've been admitted on emergency, or does it mean that the health service, having actually rather little to do, has invited them to come into hospital for observation? We don't know, is the answer to that. I don't know of any way of finding out. I did try so vaguely asking what it meant, but it was difficult to formulate a question which could be answered, and I didn't get a clear answer on that.
Right.
And I myself, I had a slight problem with my hip last week, and I went to make sure it wasn't a dislocation. I went to accident emergency at a major London hospital.
Okay.
And it
How was it?
Very interesting, because I've been to A&E before, as I think most of us have.
Yeah.
And you generally go through triage, and then there's perhaps a 2 and sometimes 3 hour wait before anything much happens. I was triaged and seen by a doctor within 15 minutes.
Wow. That is good.
The place is practically empty. They haven't got anything to do. This is the great unstated fact about the NHS at the moment. Almost all the normal patients have been frightened away, and even if they can be seen, there's not a lot of things they can't do. And we see this thing now that the panorama is running tonight about the potential number of people who may die of cancer.
Yeah.
because they've failed to get the detective work done to spot it early enough to have it cured. As you know as well as I do, cancer is something which in many cases can be effectively cured if it's caught early. But
Yes.
35,000 deaths a year because of late diagnosis and delayed access to life-saving treatment is what is being suggested by BBC's panel.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan
of... This is the sort of thing that's going on. So the hospitals, it may well be that somebody who presents with an infection and says, well, I feel a bit ropey, the hospital says, right, we'll come in for observation. Why would they? It's not going to overload them.
No, but we also still have this kind of endless supply of numbers. I mean, funnily enough, 35, I'm not a fan of these projected numbers, but 35,000 is not a million miles away from the number of people who are supposed to have died of COVID. But we don't know that they died of COVID because we still haven't really registered what they died of.
We never will know what they died of,
no.
Because, of course, they have, for the most part, been buried and cremated without post-mortems, which would enable people to give, and even those, by the way, are not totally reliable, enable people to give a much more accurate idea of what they had died of.
Right.
In many cases, I think they were simply designated as having suffered from COVID, whether any test had been made or not. It's a shocking thing, and Dr. John Lee has pointed out that the way in which it was recorded was shocking, and I think that when or if there is a proper inquiry into this, that will be one of the things that has to be looked into. But the trouble is, we will never know.
We will never know.
Finding out how many of those deaths were not, in fact, really seriously to do with COVID at all.
Yeah. Meanwhile, let's talk about masks, because I know it's a frequent sort of visitation for you to talk about. I, for the first time this week, or in the past week, went on public transport wearing a mask, and found that not everybody on public transport is in fact wearing a mask. So you can kind of make some mockery of the idea that you're all supposed to wear masks, because of course there's nobody out there enforcing it.
Well, it depends. I mean, I did observe in a tube station last week, at the entry, just behind the ticket barriers, a line of British Transport Police refusing entry to the tube system. Anybody who wasn't wearing one of these muzzles, which is... Oh, really? I've heard stories of people. I mean, many people have exemptions, and there was a list of exemptions in the actual...
I must look at that. What sort of people have exemptions then?
Oh, if you feel severe distress, for instance, about wearing a muzzle, that is an exemption.
Right.
And but people were saying there, you can print out on the Transport for London site, you can print out a notice or card saying I am exempt from wearing a face covering.
Right. Because I'm feeling anxious.
Because the phrase is severe distress.
Right. Okay. I mean, it's a joke.
That is the actual phrase in the statutory instrument. It is one of the exemptions. There are several others, but that is one of them. And but the thing, people who were arguing that they were exempt I have been told were told by British Transport Police that they were ignoring that. But I think that it would be almost impossible to police the entire...
Yeah, well, I was on a bus, and I mean, I'm assuming that the bus drivers are not particularly interested in confronting individuals who they feel might react in a bad way if they tell them they can't get on the bus. So people...
My understanding of bus driving is it's hard enough already without you having to do that. I mean, they get a lot of insults, and and basically they stay out of it, and who can blame them?
Yes, no, absolutely right. But I mean, there is this sense, isn't there, that there is a kind of lawlessness going on, because there are those who adhere to the law and those who don't. I mean, we did a show from a pub on Saturday, as I think we told you last week, which went very well, and we missed you. We're sorry you didn't come.
I'm so sorry. It was very busy.
No, listen, I know it was a busy day for you, but the fact is that it was none of those things that people were distressed about. You know, people were sitting at tables; they weren't allowed up to the bar, but it didn't feel like a terribly bad situation. We were sitting out on a terrace. There was a woman bringing us drinks. We were able to be chatting reasonably convivially, sitting about a metre apart. You know, we were able to do a radio show with two people and a guest every 15 minutes, and it really felt quite nice to be in a pub, actually paying for drinks and sitting down in the pub, talking to people.
Oh, quite so. I went to a favourite restaurant on Saturday evening, and they had made every effort to make it as like the normal experience as possible. Right. And in fact, we very quickly forgot that there were any restrictions. They were really trying, and they were doing extremely well, I think, partly as a result. Yeah. The place was full.
And so you enjoyed that experience?
Oh, very much. Yeah, it was a huge release from this ghastly atmosphere of misery that's...
Are they also taking names in restaurants as well?
Well, a lot of these things, they can, and people can give them. But a lot of people don't understand these are merely guidelines.
Yeah.
This isn't a legal requirement.
Right.
And of course, there are very serious data protection issues with what happens to this information if it's given, which is a strong deterrent for anyone to pursue it. I mean, there have been instances where people have had information taken and there've then been improper approaches made.
Well, this is it. I mean, the fact that the
very
pubs...
bad things happen. So a lot of them are frankly not bothering, and there is no. It's not a legal obligation. It's a guideline, as with so many of these things. But people are bluffed into kowtowing.
Yeah, but also just because the guy behind the bar says, "Don't worry, we won't do anything with your information," it's not much of an assurance, really, is it, that they're not going to do something with your information? But the other thing that I find slightly perplexing about all of it is I was sitting out on this terrace and I thought to myself, and I asked the landlord, I said, "Look, if somebody comes into your pub downstairs, very far away from me, sits in a corner, very far away from everybody else, and it turns out later to have had COVID-19, according to the government, everyone who's been in the pub today, regardless of whether they were even there at the same time, is supposed to self-isolate for 14 days. It doesn't make any sense."
Well, we can all see that regulations of this kind are A, unenforceable, and B, almost certainly laughable. I think the number of people infected now with COVID-19 is said to be one person in 2,200. What are your chances of running into one of those?
Yeah.
Especially given that they're quite likely, for the most part, to be over 80 years of age.
Yeah.
There are undoubtedly doughty people over 80 who do go down to the pub, and God bless them, but you don't see many of them.
No.
Around where I come
and probably
from.
most of those...
It's just an overstatement, as it has been from the beginning. It is a huge, gigantic overstatement of the risk.
It certainly does seem to be now. I mean, I think you and I will still disagree about the beginnings of it and all of that, but certainly now it seems ridiculous. And I was fascinated as well by another piece in your column this week about the story from the coffee shop owner who was spoken to by the police, in the same way that Nigel Farage was spoken to by the police because apparently Ed Davey complained about him coming back from America and not going into quarantine. I'd quite like to see Ed Davey going into quarantine for quite a long time.
Well, you can think of a lot of people you might like, but let's not be vindictive. Hey,
that's right.
Let's try and believe in freedom for all. As after all, it is our case. No, there is the police where they did these sort of things. In some cases, it wasn't the police; it would be council officials.
Yeah.
But one hears quite a lot of people trying to run an honest takeaway business being bothered in this officious, bureaucratic way. But when the police do it, and the person involved a year ago had his shop burgled and trashed, and they did nothing, and reported drug dealing activity in the park opposite his shop, and they did nothing. But the police turn up and give him a hard time for allowing somebody to have a cup of tea because it's raining inside.
Yeah.
You do sense, don't you, that authority has been turned away backwards. It's no longer doing what we elected it to do, what we pay our taxes for it to do. It's doing something else that it wants to do, which has nothing to do with us.
No, exactly. And also, there are so many exceptional situations, for example, that have been going on since the beginning of the lockdown. We've all been going to supermarkets. We've all been walking quite close to one another in shops, which have been allowed to stay open. So much of it seems contradictory to me.
It is contradictory, and if you're really concerned about national health as well, the continued shutting of gyms and swimming pools is a nonsense. That will do more damage to the health of the nation than COVID-19.
Yeah.
Depriving people of exercise is a disastrous thing. Exercise is the principal pillar of health, and if people can't have it, then they will become ill, and they will age faster, and they will become more of a burden on the health service. It's a madness, and it can't be justified. If you're going to let people go to pubs and restaurants, how can you possibly forbid them to go to the gym or to the swimming pool? It is.
But what do you make, Peter, though, of the people who you would think mostly be otherwise sensible? And I'm talking about commentators who appear on all sorts of broadcast media, who write in newspapers, who seem completely opposite to you. Worried about this lockdown being released too early, worried about people going out drinking like they were in Old Compton Street on Saturday night, and who generally are very much for this kind of extension, if you like, of self-imprisonment.
I've been trying to work out where the division lies. It's not a left-right division.
Right.
It's not wholly an old and young division. I know of older people who are as overcome by panic as many young people. I think it lies to some extent in character. I do think I've been very fortunate in two ways. One, I was brought up in this country when it was still free, and I'm used to being free, and therefore I feel very hemmed in and angry when anyone attempts to take away any of the freedom that I regard as my birthright. Secondly, I've done a bit of traveling in the world, and I'm a lot more suspicious, I think, as a result of authority and of what I'm told than other people are. So that's my reason for being in doubt. But I think most people, particularly who've grown up in the television age, have grown up much more conformist than I did. And this is basically, it's a conformist belief. Everyone thinks it, so everyone thinks it. And it's like the sort of nationalization of the sense of humor that the television and the internet have done. Everybody laughs at the same jokes. Everybody thinks the same thing. Yeah. Everybody has the same opinion of everything from Mars bars to Margaret Thatcher. It's all the same. And people are very uncomfortable about being outside it. I think it's part of it. Also, I think some people just don't have the antenna for danger. I still say, to me, that the moment this came, it felt like a sort of Sarajevo. Yeah. Something had happened, deep down in the structure of Western society, which meant that bad things were coming. And I felt it instinctively. I thought, please not let's go careering down this slope like that. The way in which the Sarajevo assassination in 1914 snowballed into this terrible war. I feel this snowballing going all the time. None of these other things, the taking the knee and all the rest of it, the tearing down of statues, would have happened if it hadn't been for this.
No. But how Brexit related do you think it could be, though? Because there does seem to be a kind of Brexit attitude going on as well, where there was an element being spoken of at the weekend, that the people who were going out drinking and enjoying themselves and sort of being careless with their health and everybody else's were the kind of thick people. There was this kind of sense that the thick racists were back out drinking again. They must be Brexit supporters. You know what I mean? There's always that kind of background to it.
But that is the modern snobbery, isn't it?
Yeah.
That people love to look down on those with whom they disagree. And also there is a large disenfranchised part of the population which is still quite traditional in itself. It still likes going to pubs and things like this, which other parts of the population don't really sympathise with. And the class divisions in this country still exist, but they've shifted. And that's part of it. But in political terms, I don't think it is. One of the interesting things about this is that it's pushed the whole European issue way out of people's minds. And when it comes thumping back in a very big way, which it will do towards the end of the year, then I think we're going to be quite surprised.
Yes, I think so. I mean, I wonder whether people have not just forgotten about it, but also because they feel that this is a bigger issue and this is more frightening, that actually Brexit doesn't look so frightening anymore.
Maybe. Well, they may find that that's not so. When it's added on to the terrible economic problems which we are now beginning ever so slightly to experience, when it's added onto those, the possibility of our being treated as a third country and the motorways in Kent becoming gigantic lorry parks, when that happens, I think people are going to start thinking that it is quite important, which it is.
Well, yeah. Let me finish up with.
I speak as someone who has for many years wanted us to leave, but not like this.
Right. Let me finish up with the freebies that are being thrown at Covent Garden and surrounding environs in the theatre business, basically. This is kind of admission by the government that this is not furlough money. This is basically rescue money, not to reopen, but to stay shut.
Well, I think it's a bit much. People would be trolleyed out onto the radio this morning saying how wonderful it is the government's done this. It would have been a lot more wonderful if the government hadn't shut down in the first place, wouldn't it?
Well, yes.
And now to put it, the government put its iron hand into all our pockets and extract millions and millions of pounds from our pockets to pay to keep theatres going while they don't actually operate because they shut them by mistake in a panic, doesn't seem to me to be a particular subject of praise.
As somebody pointed out, for heaven's sake, don't put a stage at the end of Old Compton Street on Saturday night because you're not allowed to do a show, but everybody who's there is the equivalent of about 4 theatres full.
Well, yeah, and also don't put a gym there either. Who could go to that or anything? The whole thing has a mindless, ill thought out, panicky inconsistency which betokens its origins in the confused mind of one Alexander Johnson, possibly the most clueless person ever to occupy the office of Prime Minister, and that's
so your view on him hasn't changed.
Competition. It's worsened. I know you have to say yes, a pleasant companion, amusing, all the rest of it, but as a Prime Minister, Olympically useless.
Well, that's a pretty good note to end on, I think. Peter, thank you very much indeed. As ever, delightful to talk to you. Peter Hitchens with his view of the lockdown thus far. He doesn't seem to be changing his mind. I have to say, I mean, he's making perfect sense now. And I'm agreeing with him about what's going on, because it does seem to me that we can open everything now, can't we? I mean, I said this when Boris announced that July the 4th was going to be the day. I said, that's it. The lockdown's over. Why can't we just open the theatres? Why can't we just open the gyms? Why can't we just open everything? Because it seems to me that that's where we are, isn't it? Has anybody got a good reason for me to say something other than that? If you have, you can by all means call me and tell me why I'm wrong. 0344 499 1000. Good luck with that. This is Talk Radio.